All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Beginning by thanking our sponsors, to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph, especially on this day of Purim Katan. So we thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah and Dinah Dov, Zichronim Livracha, and to thank Art and Shari Miller for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Art's brother, Richard Miller, Reuven Ben Betzalel, V'rachel, Zichron Livrach. We open that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH. All of the neshamas will have an aliyah, and the families ein nechama. So with that, let us begin. We have some beautiful, beautiful Gemara ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf Vav 6. We are picking up on daf Hem Beis 5b at the two dots, right as where we left off yesterday. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8. 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 21 lines up from the bottom. In the middle of the wide line. So the Gemara over here quotes the pasuk from Yirmiyahu. Beautiful, moving pasuk. V'damoa tidma v'ateret ene dim'a ki nishba eder Hashem. So literally, again, literal translation is damoa dim'a. So dema is a lashon of tears. So damoa tidma, there have been tears of tears, and tear has come down from my eyes because my flock, or the flock of God, has been taken captive. So ask the Gemara, says really beautiful. V'dema tidma v'ateret ene dim'a ki nishba eder Hashem. Amar Rebbe Lazar. Shlosha dima'os halalu lama. Why 3 tears? Right? When you look at the pasuk, there's a total of 3 tears. Why 3 tears? Achas al mikdash rishon, v'achas al mikdash sheni, v'achas al yisrael shegalim koman. 1 tear was for the first Beis Hamikdash, 1 tear was for the second Beis Hamikdash, and 1 tear was for Klal Yisrael who have been exiled from their place. So very moving. 1 bayis rishon, 1 bayis sheni, 1 for Klal Yisrael. V'ikad da'amri. Others say, Achas al Bittul Torah. No, 1 of the tears was for Bittul Torah. So it could very well be that according to the second approach, it's 1 tear for first Beis Hamikdash, 1 tear for second Beis Hamikdash, 3rd tier for Bittul Torah, for the negation of the study of Torah. So the Gemara says, Leman Damar al Shagali Yisrael Hainu Dechsiv Kinish Ba'id Hashem. So I will say the first approach, so remember, interesting, everybody's agreeing there's 3 tiers, right? Again, when you look at the pasuk, the word tier is mentioned 3 times. So first approach, 1 tier for the first Beis Hamikdash, 1 tier for the second Beis Hamikdash, 1 tier for Klal Yisrael. Second approach, 1 tier for Beis Hamikdash, 1 tier for first Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash, 3rd tier for Bittul Torah. So says the Gemara, according to the first opinion, it makes sense, because lashon of the pasuk is kinishba eder Hashem, right? The wording in the pasuk is for the flock of God has been taken captive. So it makes sense that the 3rd tier is for Klal Yisrael. Elamandamar Bittul Torah my kinishba eder Hashem. But according to the second approach, who says that the 3rd tier is for Bittul Torah, what does it mean kinishba eder Hashem? To which the Gemara says, Kevan shagali Yisrael im koman. Ein lecha bittul Torah gadol mizeh. That once Klal Yisrael was exiled, ki nishba eder Hashem, once Klal Yisrael was exiled, there is no greater bittul Torah than that. And I was about to say, it's a very profound Gemara on 2 levels. So first of all, let's explain this last piece. So the Gemara says, what's the trauma of Galus? Rabbi says, this is an incredible idea. Ki nishba eder Hashem means that the flock of God has been taken captive. Galus, exile, diaspora. What's the ultimate trauma of exile, of diaspora? It's an inability to fully focus on Ruchnius. It's an inability, remember, the greatest trauma of Galus is what it does to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what it means when it says that the 3rd tier is for Bittul Torah. Bittul Torah doesn't just mean, I could be learning, but I'm doing something else, or I'm supposed to be learning and I'm not paying attention. Bittul Torah itself represents the inability or the negation of focus on ruchnius, on spirituality. So the second opinion says, what's the greatest ramification of galus? It's the inability to fully focus on spirituality as we are meant to do. But I will say, how incredible is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheds a tear for Bittul Torah? It's quite amazing that I understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries for the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. I understand he cries for the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. But he also cries for Bittul Torah. When he sees a Jew who could be engaging in spirituality, when he sees a Jew who could be engaging in Torah, a Jew who could be furthering his spiritual development, but does not do so, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries. Also think about this, a parent could relate to this. When do you cry most for your child? Right? In those moments where you see what your child could have been had he or she applied himself just a bit more. Right? When my child fails, we all fail. We all fail. But when I see that, had you just pushed yourself a little more, right? Had you just applied yourself a little bit more, had you just had a bit more self-confidence, had you just put a little bit more koach in what you could have accomplished, what you could have been, that's Bittul Torah. That's from the eyes of Chagigah Baruch Hu. Chagigah Baruch Hu says, had they just, Chagigah Baruch Hu cries for Bittul Torah as well. So along the same lines, this is such a beautiful Gemara. Tanrabanan. Shlosh HaKadosh Baruch Hu bocha aleim. There are three people for whom HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries every day. B'chol yom. Who are they? Al she'efshar la'asok b'Torah ve'eino osek. For someone who could have learned Torah but does not do so. Right? That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries for. Al she'efshar la'asok b'Torah ve'osek. Someone who is unable to learn Torah but yet finds the ability to do so. V'al parnes hanisgah al hatzibur. And for a leader who exerts himself arrogantly over the tzibur. HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries for these three people. So we'll say, let's just spend a moment focusing on this. So 1 and 3 are a lot more understandable. Right? So we'll say, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries for someone who could have learned Torah, but does not learn Torah. What does that represent? Lost opportunities. HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries when he sees his children having lost opportunities. So a person could learn. And I will say, by the way, Al she'efshar lasok b'Torah ve'eino osek means so many things. It could mean someone who could learn but doesn't learn at all. Someone who could learn more but sells themselves short. Right? So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees his children and he sees that they have lost opportunities, they're letting opportunities go through their fingers. What is it? Slip through their fingers. HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries for that. That's lost opportunities. What's number 3? Number 3 is the parnes, the leader who exerts himself arrogantly. Same idea, lost opportunity. A person has a position of leadership and has the opportunity to positively impact people, to lift people up, but instead uses his leadership as a way to bolster his ego, right? As a way to feed his arrogance. That's misgai al hatzibur. It doesn't necessarily mean he's doing anything bad. It just means that he's misusing his leadership. You could be doing so much, you could be lifting so many people up, and all of us are leaders in our own rights. So a person uses his position of leadership to feed his ego, not to go ahead and lead the tzibur. HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries once again, lost opportunity. So 1 and 3 are lost opportunities. What about the middle one? This is why we start at 5:45, right? What about the middle one? So I'll say, so the middle one, remember again, who's that? That's the individual who doesn't have the lashon is she'ef shalas a person who can't learn, but finds the opportunity to learn. So we'll say, this one doesn't seem to fit, right? How do you look at this case? This looks great. So it could be, in this case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is crying what? Crying what? Tears of joy. So maybe they're not all three the same, right? So in one, a guy who could have learned but doesn't learn, those are the tears of lost opportunity. Leader who exerts himself arrogantly over the tzibur, lost opportunity. But guy number 2, a guy who couldn't learn, right? Ef shalasa b'Torah, but finds the time to learn, those are tears of joy. The problem with that is it doesn't seem to fit, right? In other words, the Gemara is grouping all three of them together, and even so, tears of a lost opportunity, tears of joy, tears of lost opportunity sound strange. Perhaps what the Gemara is saying is like this. See, I will say, who is this guy? Al she'i efshar la'asok b'Torah va'osek. Who is this person? A person who is unable to learn Torah, but goes in and does it. People say, what does it mean he's unable to learn Torah? So I will say, maybe the Pasha Pshat in this is like this. This is a guy who tells himself he can't do things. This is a person who tells himself, I can't do this. I can't do things. And he goes through life telling himself that he cannot do things. So he also told himself, I can't learn Torah. No, Torah is not to me. I can't learn Torah. And then something amazing happens, which is, he learns Torah. He learns Torah. And he shows himself that's something that he thought he could not do. He actually has the ability to do. And that's incredible. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries for a person like that also. Because how many other things in life did you convince yourself that you can't do also? How many other things did you tell yourself that are impossible for you, but yet you never summoned up the courage to go ahead and try it? Al-Shi'ef la'asok batorah va'osek batorah is a person who convinced himself that he can't do things. He decided he can't learn Torah either, but he found the courage to learn, realizing that he can do it. So he finally realized that things that he told himself are impossible are actually possible. But Nebuch, how many other things over the course of the journey of life have you lost out on? So it turns out that all three tiers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are tiers of lost opportunities. For the person who says that he does, for the person who has time to learn but doesn't learn, lost opportunity. For the parnes, for the leader who uses his leadership to lord over other people, lost opportunity. Instead of building people up, you're building yourself up. And number three, the person who told himself that he's unable to learn, and he learns, it's wonderful you came around in this particular opportunity. But how many other things in life have you convinced yourself that you can't do? How many other lost opportunities now have you let slip through your finger? It turns out that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries like regular parents cry also when they see their children losing out on opportunities for personalistic growth and advancement in life. Such an incredible Gemara. Rebbe, Havanakit Sefer Kinos Gakari Bigave. Rebbe was holding a Sefer Kinos, and he was reading it. Kimat al Psuka. When he got to the following pasuk, Hishlich Mishamayim Aretz, so he got to the pasuk that described Klal Yisrael's descent. That literally, again, Hashem took Klal Yisrael, they were standing so high, and he threw them down to the ground. Nafal min yadei, and the Sefer Kinis fell out of his hand. Amar mi'igra ram lebira amikta. Oh, that which was so high fell to so low. Reb Shabbos says, so literally again, he felt the experience of Klal Yisrael. That he was holding the Sefer. The Sefer was so high, the Sefer fell to the ground. Very much representative of the fall of Klal Yisrael as well. Rabbi Chia Havakashachli Ba'azli Baruch was an incredible Gemara. Rabbi Chia were traveling together. Kimatulahu Masa. They came to a particular city. Amri Ikat Surah Mirabanan Hacha Nezel V'Nekabel Apei. So I will say, listen to this. So Rabbi and Rabbi Chia are traveling. They came to a particular city. And ultimately, again, when they came to the city, so they said, is there a Talmud Chacham in this city? If there's a Talmud Chacham in the city, we should visit him, right? To just pay respect to the Chacham of the city. So they asked one of the townspeople, and the townsperson responded. He said, Amri ikutzar mirabanan hacha u'ma'ar einayimhu. There is a Talmud Chacham here, he's blind. He's blind Talmud Chacham. Aranai says is a euphemism, right? Aranai is luminescent sight, right? He sees very well. So that's okay. So it's low called lashon sayin. So ultimately, blind Talmud Chacham. I'm the Rabbi Chia Rebbe. So Rabbi Chia said to Rebbe, listen, Tiv why don't you stay here? Remember again, Rebbe was the nasi. So Rebbe, you stay here. Lo tizalzel b'nesiuscha ezel ana va'akbil apei. So Rabbi Chia says to Rabbi, you stay here, right? You don't have to make the journey into the city. In other words, what Rabbi Chia was concerned about was, who is this guy, right? A blind Talmud Chacham. How much of a Talmud Chacham can he be if he was blind? So Rabbi Chia felt, Rabbi, it's not appropriate for you to start taking this detour. I'll take the detour. I'll represent. You stay here. So the Gemara says, no, but Rabbi insisted, and he joined Rabbi Chia to meet the blind Talmud Chacham. So they both went to meet the blind Talmud Chacham. Listen to how beautiful this is. Amar lahem. So the blind Talmud Chacham said to Rabbi and Rabbi Chia, Atem hikbaltem panim hanirim ve'enon roen. You came to see someone who is seen but cannot see. Tisku lahakbil panim haroem ve'enon. May you be zocha to go ahead and see the countenance of the one who sees but cannot be seen. Of course, a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the blind Talmud Chacham gave them a beautiful bracha. You came to see the one who is seen but cannot see. May you be Zocha Mirza Hashem to be seen or to see the one who can see but is not seen. So Amr so Rabbi says to Rabbi Chia after they got this bracha, Eko hashta manasa mehai birchasa. Right? Had I listened to you, you would have prevented me from getting this beautiful bracha. Incredible. Amrule miman shimi alacha. So they said to him, tell me, how do you, they said to this Rabbi said, by the way, this blind Talmud Chacham remains unnamed in the story. So they said to him, tell me, From where do you know this? Now, know what? Rashi says, Minalacha shekalkach gidola hakbalas panim. They both say, obviously what's happening over here was as follows. The blind Talmud Chacham gave them a bracha because he saw that Rabbi and Rabbi Chia went out of their way to come and to see him. So they said to the blind Talmud Chacham, from where do you know that coming to see a Talmud Chacham carries such great weight, right? From where do you know that this carries such great bracha? So listen to this. So he said to them, Shmi'alecha mipirka Rabbi Yaakov. Mipirka Rabbi Yaakov Shmi'ali. I heard it in the Shir of Rabbi Yaakov. What happened to the Shir of Rabbi Yaakov? Rabbi Yaakov ish chitya hava makbil. Rabbi Yaakov ish kfar chitaye hava makbil apei dirabe kol yoma. Rabbi Yaakov, who was a man from the village of Chitye, he used to go ahead and he was mekabel his Rebbe, right? He used to go ahead and see his Rebbe each and every day. Okay? So Kikash. Now ultimately Rabbi Yaakov gets old. Apparently Rabbi Yaakov was older than his Rebbe. He was older than his Rebbe. Amarle, lo nitzta'er mar de lo yochil mar. So his Rebbe said to Rabbi Yaakov, it's not necessary. You don't have to come to see me every single day. So Amar Leis, Rabbi Yaakov said, Mi zuter mai dichsiv b'hu b'rabanon. Do you take lightly that which it says in the pasuk? Vayechi od lanetzach. So we'll say over here, the Gemara is quoting from the pasuk from Tilim. Vayechi od lanetzach. Lo yira hashachas, that literally again, he who will live forever will not see destruction. Ki yira chachamim yamusu. So literally what say means, he will see the chachamim and will die. Now what does that mean? So the way he darshan it was as follows. Uma hara chachamim misasan yichya, someone who sees chachamim in their death. In other words, you have the opportunity to visit a kever of a chacham. That's a big skula. Bechayer alachas kama v'kama. Visiting the righteous when they're dead, ultimately, again, is a schos. All the more so what? When you visit the righteous when they are alive. So I will say, so therefore, again, this old man, this blind Talmud Chacham, learned this lesson from Rabbi Yaakov, and ultimately conveyed it to Rabbi and Rabbi Chia, giving them a bracha for coming to visit him. So beautiful. Rav Idi, Avod Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Havaragel Dava Azul Tlasa Yarchi Ba'archa. Both is an incredible story also. So Rav Idi, the father of Rabbi Yaakov, Havaragel Dava Azul Tlasa Yarchi Ba'archa, the Chad Yoma Bebe Rav. Both listen to this. He lived a very far distance away from the yeshiva of Rav. So here's what he used to do. He would travel 3 months in order to be able to spend 1 day in yeshiva. Right? He would travel 3 months to get 1 day in the yeshiva. And therefore we'll say, what would happen afterwards? He would then have to turn around. Now if you look at Rashi, last Rashi in the Daf, Havaragil, Mahalik Shlosha Chadashim Hayim Mibeisa Lebeis Medrash, Benoseh Mibeisa Achar Pesach, V'lo Yom Echad, V'chozer Lebeisa L'Samech Es Ishto B'Chag HaSukkos. Listen to this. So after Pesach, he would travel 3 months to get to the yeshiva of Rav. He'd get there 1 day, then he'd have to turn around and go back home in order to make it home for what? For Sukkos. So he would travel a total of 6 months, 3 months to yeshiva, 1 day in yeshiva, and then turn back. So listen to this. The students of the yeshiva made fun of him. V'havukari Rabbanon bar be Rav dechad yoma. They called him the guy who spent 1 day in yeshiva. Now the truth is, we all know a lot of guys like that, right? The guy who spent 1 day in yeshiva. But ultimately, Rav Idi did it because, again, I will say, it's such a fascinating thing. He needed to spend 1 day in the yeshiva of Rav, so literally, again, 6 months to travel. 3 months there, 1 day in yeshiva, 1 day back. But the Talmidim made fun of him. So Chalosh Daite, he became very upset. So Karya Nafshe, Schok L'Re'ehu Ehyeh. He said about himself the pasuk. That literally, again, he has become a joke to his friends. Amarle Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Matusa minach, lo ta'anish l'hu l'rabbanon. Don't punish the rabbis. See, I will say, when you disparage a Talmud Chacham, a person Chas V'Shalom disparages a Talmud Chacham, a person Chas V'Shalom goes ahead and makes a Talmud Chacham feel bad, that's a very serious transgression. So Rabbi Yochanan was actually concerned for the other members of the Beis Medrash. And he says, therefore he says to Rav Idi, don't get upset. Don't get upset, right? Because if you get upset, ultimately, again, your fellow members of the Beis Medrash will suffer the consequences. So we'll say, listen to this. So Nafak Rabbi Yochanan lebei Midrash v'darash. Rabbi Yochanan went out to the Beis Medrash and he darshened. And he said, we'll say so beautifully, Va'osi yom yidrushun, v'das drachai yechafatzun. So Marvin quotes the pasuk from Mishael. So we'll say, now listen to the pasuk over here. Literally it means, and me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yom yidrushun. They will seek me out day by day. So it says the Gemara, v'chi bayom darshanoso v'layla in darshanoso. Do we only seek out HaKadosh Baruch Hu by day and not at night? Elalomer lacha, rather it teaches us, kala osek baTorah afilu yom echad bashana, ma'ala alav akosov kilo asak kala shana kula. We'll say that if I go ahead, it's so beautiful. If a person is osek baTorah, person engages in Torah even for one day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu treats it as if he has learned Torah the entire year. That I will say, sometimes a person puts in effort for one day. We'll say this is part of the general motif in Chazal of Yeshkona Olama B'Sha'achos. Sometimes you could infuse meaning into your entire life in one day. In one day, I'll just mention this now because it's Purim Katan today, right? It's your Dalet Adar Aleph today. So there's an element of Purim on Purim Katan. Also, I'll just mention, just by way of passing, in one of the most dramatic episodes in the Megillah. So Mordechai says to Esther, remember again when they hear about the decree of Achashverosh. So Mordechai says to Esther that she has to go to the king and lobby the king on behalf of the Jewish people, and Esther effectively says no. Now, see, she doesn't say no straight out. Like a lot of times when you ask people for something, they don't say no, right? They'll just tell you why it's impossible. So it's like saying the same thing as saying no. So she says to Mordechai, I can't go to the king. I haven't been invited to the king. You go to the king without an invitation. It's mamish, a death sentence. And Mordechai says, you know what? If you don't go, if you don't go, right? If you don't go and advocate for the people, it's okay. Salvation will come from somewhere else. But then he says, Umiyodea im la'is kazo segat lamalchus. I'm sorry. You and your father's house will be lost forever. And who knows, maybe this is the moment that you became queen. And there's a beautiful, beautiful Malbim on the pasuk. And the Malbim says so beautifully the following yesod. He says, what does it mean, Yodea im la'is kazo segat lamalchus? That sometimes Chagigah Baruch Hu puts a person on this world, just to accomplish one thing in one moment. That's all. Sometimes all of life just comes down to one moment. And maybe it's a couple of moments throughout life. And it's that one moment that endows your entire life with meaning. But the danger is if you miss your moment, you run the risk of denying meaning to your entire life. And sometimes, says the Malbim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings about multiple generations just to bring about one person to do one thing in one moment. And if you miss your moment, not only do you deny meaning to your life, but you potentially deny meaning to the lives of all those who came before you. That's why Mordechai says to Esther, if you don't act now, perhaps, Hare'at ubeis avich tovedu. You and your father's home will be lost. I mean, you and your father's home will be lost. Because Esther, maybe the only reason your parents existed, and your grandparents existed, and your great-grandparents existed, was so they could have you, so that you could be in the palace for this one moment. And if you don't act, you potentially deny meaning to your life and to all those who came before you. So Rabbi Yochanan was darshaning over here a very similar drasha, that sometimes again, Osi yom yidrushim. Sometimes a person does the right thing one day, one time, one moment, and suddenly again it gives meaning to one's entire life. Such an incredible yesod. Sometimes it's just about the short game. Sometimes it's not the long game, right? Sometimes it's just about finding that moment and making a difference in a dramatic way. So Rabbi Yochanan was saying this, remember again, in order to give chizik to Rav Idi. Because here Rav Idi is traveling all of this time, 3 months there, 3 months back to spend one day in yeshiva. So beautiful. But the opposite is also true. The chsiv, b'mispar hayom asher tartem es haaretz. So also by the Meraglim, v'chi arboim shana chatu, did the Meraglim sin for 40 years? V'alo arboim yom chatu, they only sinned for 40 days, right? Their entire journey was 40 days. Alomer lecha, kala over avira fili yom achaz bashana, ma'ala ala v'akosav kilo avar kala shana. But to teach us that sometimes you sin for one day. Sometimes an Avera could be so severe that one day of sin is the equivalent to what? A year of sin. A year of sin. Every year, every day that the Meragelim sinned ultimately translated into a year of punishment for Klal Yisrael. So Rabbosai, let's focus on the positive. You see something amazing. You have to ask, why did Rav Idi travel all that time? 3 months there, 3 months back. Rabbosai, so ultimately, again, there's got to be a closer yeshiva. Got to be a closer yeshiva. So Rabbosai, this also ties into the idea that sometimes a person finds a Rebbe, person finds a yeshiva, person finds a shir. You can't always spiritually succeed in every single atmosphere. Sometimes a person has to find the place, find the spot where they're going to succeed. And even if it's a little less convenient, that's where you go. That's where you go. It also tells us that sometimes, again, spiritual success really requires a certain sense of amelus. That I have to, sometimes the recipe for success, for my personal success, is not easy. The recipe for my personal success requires an incredible amount of inconvenience. You see, today, everything is about convenience, right? It's all about how could I make things the most convenient. Now, there's a beauty in that also. There is a beauty in that. But sometimes in order to be successful, the road to success is incredibly inconvenient. So Rav Idi felt the place where he needed to learn was by Rav. Did that come with an incredible amount of inconvenience? Absolutely. 3 months there, 3 months back, one day in yeshiva. But that was the recipe that he felt he needed for his success. Inconvenience is often the prerequisite for spiritual success. And I will say, by the way, did it work? Did it work? Yeah, he became Ravidi, right? I will say he's quoted all over Shas. So obviously, whatever he did was the right recipe for success. The easy road is not necessarily the path to success. Sometimes the path to success is paved with an incredibly long and arduous journey. Incredible Gemara. So let's get back to a little bit of the halacha. Ezu katan. So remember again, we had a machlokes in the Mishnah. Machlokes in Shebeshan and Beisilel about a katan who is chayiv in coming up to, the lashon over here was as follows. The lashon was Ezu katan. Remember again, because the Mishnah said everybody is chayiv in olas re'iyah, except for a katan, or everyone is chayiv in re'iyah. I should say, not olas re'iyah, the mitzvah of re'iyah, of coming to the Beis HaMikdash, except a katan. So remember again, we had a machlokes as to what type of katan was exempt. Machlokes Beishan and Beisil. So remember again, Beis Shammai said, any child who's unable to ride on his father's shoulders. Beis Hillel said, any child who's unable to hold his father's hand. So it says the Gemara, Ezu katan shein kol sheni yochal lirkav aksefo shel aviv. So again, Gemara quotes the Mishnah from Beis Shammai, if a child is so little that he can't sit on his father's shoulders, he is not chayiv in re'iyah. And I will say, I just want to point out over here, re'iyah means coming up to the Beis HaMikdash. Up until now, re'iyah has often meant olas re'iyah. Here it means actually coming to the Beis HaMikdash. So maske for Rabbi Zera, supposed to listen to this. Rabbi Zera says, 1 second, ad hacha man asye. But 1 second, we're talking over here about the obligation to come to the Beis HaMikdash. Right? So Rabbi say, in order to come to the Beis HaMikdash, you have to first what? Arrive in Yerushalayim. So how did he get to Yerushalayim? Right? In other words, we're talking about coming from Yerushalayim to the Harabayis. That's the mitzvah of re'iyah. So how did he get to Yerushalayim? Rashi says, ad hacha man asi ad Yerushalayim miyaviu. V'halo mishuhu yachal lios chutz mi'imo lechos yad aviv dikdei aliyah Yerushalayim laharabayis ad omer. So obviously he got to Yerushalayim. So if the kid got to Yerushalayim, how did he get to Yerushalayim? Omer le'abayi ad hacha timechai be'ime v'simcha aisise ime. Mikan ve'ilech im yochol lalos v'lechos biado shel avim Yerushalayim laharabayis chayiv ve'ilo pater. Shabbos say, listen to this. So the Gemara says, no, here's the difference. His mother was obligated to come to Yerushalayim. Shabbos says, it's actually quite fascinating. You see, remember again, the Mishnah said that a woman is pater ultimately from re'iyah. So a woman is not obligated to come to the harabayis on the regalim. But she is chayiv to come to Yerushalayim. Why is she chayiv to come to Yerushalayim? We'll also listen to this. Rashi, min dechayiv besimcha, la'alos l'regav v'lismoach bechag im baila. A woman is obligated to come to Yerushalayim to celebrate with her husband on the Yom Tiv. Da'ala simcha nitztavu nashim dichsiv v'samachta ata uveisecha. So I will say, this is incredible. A woman is obligated to come to Yerushalayim for the regalim. Why? Because the mitzvah of simcha demands that the family be intact. So the family is right. So the husband has to be in Yerushalayim because he has to bring his karbanos to the Beis Hamikdash. So he has to be in Yerushalayim for Yom Tiv. So his wife has to be with him. She has to come also to Yerushalayim because there is a mitzvah of simcha. So Rabbi said, this is fascinating. So what the Gemara is saying is like this. The family is coming to Yerushalayim because the intact family has to be in Yerushalayim. The husband has an obligation now to do what? What's the next step? To do what? To go to the Beis Hamikdash. What we call the actual Aliyah L'Regel. He has an obligation, or what we call Re'iyah. He has an obligation, again, Rashi quotes the Pasuk, Kol Zechurcha, right? Shalosh Pamim Bashana, Yeira'ah Kol Zechurcha as Pnei Ha'adon Hashem. That's the mitzvah of Re'iyah, to actually go to the Beis Hamikdash. So now, the family, including the wife, has an obligation to go out and come to Yerushalayim. The husband has an additional obligation of Re'iyah. So what about the kids? What about his son? Oh, so now it depends. So this is Machlokes Rishon Beis Hillel. So ultimately, again, Beis Hillel will say, if halacha l'maisa, the son is old enough that he can hold his father's hand and now walk up to the Beis Hamikdash, he's obligated in Re'iyah as well. If the son is so little that he can't hold his father's hand, according to Beis Hillel, right, then halacha l'maisa is not obligated to ascend with his father. Incredible. So the Gemara says, hey, Shiv Rebbe Tachas Beis Hillel Divrei Beis Shammai. So Rebbe, kind of speaking on behalf of Beis Hillel, tried to go ahead and answer up, which means refute Beis Shammai. So both say, see what's happening. So now this totally opens a brand new dimension. So suddenly again, the mitzvah of simcha demands that the family be intact for Yom Tiv. Well, if the family is going to be intact, where do they have to be? Yerushalayim. Father, other male members, adult male members of the family, have an obligation of Re'iyah, go up to the Beis Hamikdash. And now the shaila is, does the minor son have an obligation to go up? So Beis Hillel will say, yeah, as long as he's old enough to hold his father's hand and walk up to the Beis Hamikdash, he does so. If not, he does not have an obligation. So now Rebbe comes along and tries to refute Beis Shammai. I will say, beautiful Gemara, V'chana lo alsa ki amra li'isha, ki amra li'isha, adi gamel hanar, vavi osif. So also listen to this. So the pasuk over here quotes, Chana did not go up to the Mishkan. Chana didn't go up to the Mishkan. So both I remember again, this is after actually, so last night I was by a chuppah last night. Dr. Lussman was with me. Right? So I never heard this before. They sang Tfilas Chana actually before the chuppah. Simcha Liner sang right before it was Mamish, Alatz Libi. I think it's a Shalshala song. So just reminding me of Chana, such a beautiful way to set the tone for a chuppah. So anyway, Chana la also ki amra li isha. So Chana did not go up, right? Chana did not go up to the Mishkan. Right. This is after she went ahead and she had Shmuel. So she didn't go up. Ki amra li isha adi gamel hanar. I'm not going to go until the child is weaned. So remember again, biblically they would wean a child at 3 years old. So she said, Shmuel's too little, I'm not going to take him up. Vavi Osiv. But Shmuel was already old enough that what? He could have sat on his father's shoulders. So remember, we'll say this is Rebbe trying to refute the position of Beis Shammai. Because remember again, what did Beis Shammai say? Beis Shammai said that halacha l'maisa, once a child is old enough that he could sit on his father's shoulders, he's obligated to go to Yerushalayim. So, or I should say, I have to be careful with my term. Obligated to do what? To go to the Beis Hamikdash. Right? So you see over here that Chana kept baby Shmuel home. Right? Even though he was old enough to sit on his father's shoulders, ultimately again, she did not go, or he did not go. The young boy did not go. So this is a clear refutation to the position of Beis Shammai. So Amrlei Avu Esfa said. So actually, Musar changes Abaye. Abaye says back to Motamech Tikshilacha Chana Gufa Milo Mechayva Besimcha. But ask a different shaila: wasn't Chana herself obligated to go? Right now, remember, both say they're going to Shiloh. Right? There's no Beis Hamikdash now. There's a Mishkan. They're going to Shiloh. But forget about baby Shmuel. Wasn't Chana herself obligated to go to Shiloh al Simcha? Ela Chana Mifankusa yiseirasa chazye baby Shmuel. So we'll say Chana saw that her baby was very sensitive. She saw that Shmuel was a bit of a mifunak, right? V'chasha baby Shmuel l'chol da'archa. She was concerned that ultimately, again, the journey would take its toll on Shmuel. So therefore, the essential what the Gemara says is you can't bring a raya from this case. This is a different kind of case. Could be that Shmuel she saw just was a little bit more sensitive. Okay, so boy Rabbi Shimon katan chiga divrei Beis Shammai v'sumim divrei Shneihem mau. Let's listen to this interesting case. What happens if you have a child who's a chiger, who's crippled, and therefore again cannot walk on his own, or a child who is blind? According to Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, mahu. Is there such an obligation for such a child to accompany his father going up to the Beis Hamikdash? So echidami. Well, what's the case? Ilema b'chiger sheniachal lispashet v'sum sheniachal lispateach. Say if we're talking about a child who's crippled, and the nature of his condition is that he's not going to be healed, or he's blind, and the nature of the condition is that he's not going to regain sight. Hashta gadol pater kata mibai. The boss say in such a situation, if you had an adult with this situation, the adult would be pater. Right? The boss we saw this before in the Gemara. We saw in the Mishnah, an adult who's blind or an adult who's crippled is not obligated in the mitzvah of re'iyah. So if an adult wouldn't be obligated, then what? Alachas kama v'kama child wouldn't be obligated. Lo tzricha bechiger sheyachal lehispashet v'suma sheyachal lehispateach. What are we talking about over here? We're talking about, again, someone who is crippled. A child who is crippled but can be healed. Or ultimately, again, a child who has lost his sight but will regain that sight. So Shabbos says, so the shaila is now the child in their current compromised state. Knowing that Emirat Hashem, their condition is going to improve, does this child have an obligation to go with his father for re'iyah? So Amar Abaye says, very simple, Kol heicha de gadol mechay midaraisa, katan nami mechanchin le midrabanan. It's any situation where an adult would be chayiv da'araisa, a child would be chayiv ultimately again al tzchinuch midrabanan. Koleicha de gadol pater midaraisa midrabanan katan nami pater. But any situation where halacha lamaisa a gadol is pater midaraisa, there is no mitzvah of chinuch. Remember again, the entire obligation for a father to bring up his son for re'iyah is a din in chinuch. We'll say, what is the din in chinuch? This is very important. Chinuch means I'm training my child in mitzvos. So essentially the Gemara says, when is there an obligation in chinuch? When ultimately, again, an adult in the same situation would be chayiv. So we'll say, what happens if a person has temporary blindness? Are they chayiv in re'iyah? Is an adult chayiv in re'iyah? No. What happens if an adult is temporarily crippled? Is there a din in re'iyah? No. Now we'll say, even though a Meretz is going to have a complete refush thing, we look at what is now. And there is no din of aliyah l'rego, temporary blindness or temporary impairment. And therefore, again, under these circumstances, the katan would not be obligated to accompany his father as well. Good. So we'll say, so that's the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. It happens to be, we saw already in the Mishnah, that the Rambam paskins like Beis Hillel. And therefore, I will say again, at the age that a child is old enough that he could hold his father's hand, meaning that he could walk, he could hold his father's hand, he's obligated to accompany his father, I should say differently, he's not obligated in anything. His father is obligated to bring him on for the mitzvah of re'iyah to the Beis HaMikdash. But it's only once the child is old enough that he could hold his father's hand and walk. What's the nature of the child's obligation? The child has no obligation, it's the father's obligation in chinuch, in educating his child, and he's obligated therefore to bring him up to the Beis HaMikdash. Beautiful. Beis Shammai, so we'll say the next machlokes Beis Shammai in the Mishnah was about the value of karbanos. So we'll say, remember again, we had this in the Mishnah. So there are two karbanos that you're bringing up. There are really three karbanos, but they're arguing on two karbanos. Namely, again, what are they arguing about? They will say there is the olas re'iyah and shalmei chagigah. Right? So the olas re'iyah is an olah. Right? Again, an olah is a carbon that is totally burnt on the mizbeach. And then there are the shalmei chagigah. So these are both Yom Tiv offerings. So machlokes Beis Shammai is still about the value of both of them. So here we go. So Beis Shammai says, Hari'iyah shtei kesef. So we'll say, Beis Shammai says, the olas re'iyah is 2 silver pieces, and the chagigah is 1, and Beis Hillel says the opposite. Beis Hillel says the olah is 1, the chagigah is 2. So let's analyze. Tan Rabbanan, Beis Shammai omrim, Hari'iyah shtei kesef, v'chagigah ma'a kesef. So Beis Shammai says that the olas riyah is 2 silver pieces, and the Chagigah is 1. Why? Shari'iyah ola, kula lagava, masha'enkein b'Chagigah. So again, I will say, Beis Shammai says that the olas riyah is more important. Why is it more important? Because it's totally given up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Masha'enkein, again, the Shami Chagigah, that's a shlamim. It's eaten by everyone. Furthermore, we've seen ba'atzeres sheriba b'hena kasuv ba'olos yosir shlamim. Furthermore, we see by Shavuos the Torah demands that we offer up more olos than shlamim. So from here you see that a ola is more important than a shlamim. It seems he's giving 2 reasons. Number 1, an ola is an ola. It's fully given over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that endows it with more chashivos. Number 2, by Shavuos, we see that there are more olos than shlamim. So therefore, again, Beis Shammai says the ola karban should be worth more money. 2 silver pieces, that's a minimum. Whereas ultimately, again, the shlamim is only worth 1 silver piece. Beis Hillel argue. They say, no, hari'iyah ma kesef v'chagigah shtei kesef. Beis Hillel argue, and they say, no, the olas riyah is worth 1 silver piece and the Chagigah is 2, so they put more value on the Chagigah. Why? Chagigah yeshna lifnei hadibor. Oh, very interesting. Because there was a carbon Chagigah even before Matan Torah. The first time a carbon Chagigah predates an olas riyah. Carbon Chagigah was offered up before Matan Torah. Where was carbon Chagigah offered up before Matan Torah? Look at Rashi, almost right across. Yash lefnei adibar, kol dia Matan Torah, grivu shlam b'Sinai. They offered up carbon shlam by Har Sinai, where D'chsiv, vayishlach es na'arei b'nei Yisrael. So the pasuk says, vayishlach es na'arei b'nei Yisrael. They sent the lads of the Jewish people, vayalu olos, vayizbechu shlamim la'Hashem parim. They offered up shlamim. I also they offered up olos. We'll get to that in just a moment. They offered up shlamim. So both say, Beis Hillel says, what do you see from here? You see that, and now both say, now Beis Hillel, now Rashi just points out, by the way, even though this pasuk is in Parshas Mishpatim, it actually occurred before Matan Torah. These korbanos were offered up at the base of Har Sinai before Matan Torah itself. So Beis Shammai therefore says, what do you see from here? Beis Shammai says, these shlamim were shamei Chagigah. They were Shami Chagigah. So you see, Shami Chagigah were offered up even before Matan Torah. That's how important they are. Furthermore, again, Masha'enkim Bere'iyah. Olas riyah was only offered up after Matan Torah. Va'od, furthermore, Matzinu b'Nesiim Sheriba b'Haina Kasa b'Shlan Yosim b'Ola. Furthermore, I will say, by the Nesiim, when the Nesiim offered up their karbanos by Wa'at, by the Chanukas HaMizbeach, by the dedication of the Mizbeach, the Nesiim offered up more shlamim than olos. Therefore, you see from here, Beis Hillel says what? Shlamim are more important than olos. So he has a 2-pronged argument. Number 1, shlamim were offered up even before Matan Torah. Number 2, the Nesiim, by their dedication of the Mizbeach, offered up more shlamim than olos. Therefore, Beis Hillel holds that the Shami Chagigah are worth 2 silver pieces, the olas riyah worth 1. I will say a raging machlokes. Here we go. Beis Hillel, my time alone, Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel, why don't you go like Beis Shammai? Here we go. Deka'amrit riyah difa, the ola kula gava. Because remember, we're going to say, what was at the core of Beis Shammai's argument? Beis Shammai says, of course, the olas riyah has to be offered up, has to be worth more money. Why? Because the ola is more kadosh. Why is the ola more kadosh? Because it's kula Hashem. Totally given to God. So Beis Hillel will say, Adrabah, Chagigah adifa. I can argue just the opposite. Chagigah is holier. Why? Ultimately, again, the ola kula legava. Chagigah adifa, the isbe shtei achilos. So I said, it's incredible. Beis Hillel will say just the opposite. Shlamim is going to be even more, right? The shlamim is even more kaddish. Why? Because everyone gets to partake of the shlamim, right? Isn't it greater when you have a carbon that everybody gets to partake of? It's not just shtei achilos either. It's really shalosh achilos. Because by the shlamim, part of it goes on the mizbeach, part of it goes to the kohanim, and part of it goes to the owner. Mamish, it's a Klal Yisrael experience. V'dika amrit neilif me'atzeres. Furthermore, again, Beis Hillel say to Beis Shammai, and you want to learn out that there are more olos by Shavuos. I would say, I could counter that, done in carbon yachid me carbon yachid, ve'in done in carbon yachid me carbon tzibor. Ultimately, again, the olos of Shavuos are communal offerings. We're talking about over here what? Individual offerings. So it makes sense to learn out individual offerings from individual offerings, like Shami Chagigah from the Shlomim of the Nesiim, and not to learn out from the Karbanos of Shavuos, which were communal offerings. Why doesn't Beis Shammai hold like Beis Hillel? Because remember again, Beis Hillel said that Shlomim are more chashuv. Why? Because they were around even before Matan Torah. So Beis Shammai will say, I will tell you, Re'iyah nami yeshna lifnei hadibor. So ultimately, again, Beis Shammai will say, Beis Hillel, come on. In that same pasuk, they don't just offer up Shlomim by Har Sinai. What else do they offer up? Olos. So ultimately, again, Olas Re'iyah was offered. We'll say, and I just want to point out, they're calling these karbanos Olas Re'iyah, Shami Chagigah. Remember, the karbanos of Har Sinai were not on a Yom Tiv. So why are they calling it Olas Re'iyah, Shami Chagigah? Because also, I think about this just a moment. What's the whole dynamic of Yom Tiv? The whole dynamic of Yom Tiv is you're going Lifnei Hashem. You're going to see God. What happened at Har Sinai? They saw God. So as such, again, they're saying the karbanos of Matan Torah, of Har Sinai, are the same type of karbanos ultimately that you would have on a regel. And Beis Shammai will say to Beis Hillel, you want to learn it out from the karbanos of the Nesiim? I don't buy that either. I'll tell you why. So he says, Danin davar hanoig l'doros min davar hanoig l'doros, vein danin davar hanoig l'doros min davar she'en hanoig l'doros. You can't learn anything from the Nesiim. Why, Abosai? Because the Nesiim was an episodic event, right? You can't learn out generational halacha from episodic events. So therefore, again, what happened with the Nesiim was a once-in-a-history thing. So it doesn't make sense to learn out that which we do every Yom Tiv from an episodic event. Beis Hillel will say, "My shna Chagigah, the yeshna lifnei hadibor." Ultimately, again, why is Chagigah unique? In that, again, it occurred even before the Torah. Right? It occurred in Har Sinai. So watch this. So the Gemara says, Dichse, vayizbechu zvachim shlomim sa'ai Beis Hillel. What about what Beis Shammai said? Riyah nami. But apparently there was an olas riyah before Har Sinai as well. Dichsev, vaya'alu olos. So we'll say, watch this. Kasavre Beis Hillel, olas shekri v'yisrael b'midbar, olas tamid havi. Wow, the rest just gets more exciting. So Beis Hillel says, no, Beis Shammai, you're misunderstanding. That olah they offered up at Har Sinai, that olah was not an olah suriyah. What was that olah? That was the carbon tamid. Wow. Beis Shammai savri olah shekrivi yisrael b'midbar olah suriyah have. So we'll say, now, there's even a machlokes. So we'll say, now, listen to this. Everyone's agreeing the shlomim they offered up at Har Sinai, which took place before Matan Torah, was like Shami Chagigah. What's the olah they offered up? Beis Shammai says the olah they offered up, that was like an olah suriyah. Beis Hillel says, no, the olah they offered up, that was what? The carbon tamid. Wow. Amar Abaye, Beis Shammai v'Rabbi Elazar, v'Rabbi Shmuel, kulo svirlo. So what says this? Beis Shammai, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Shmuel, all of them agree, olah shekri v'Yisrael b'midbar, olah sri'iyah havi. They all agree that the olah they offered up at Har Sinai wasn't olah sri'iyah. Beis Hillel v'Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, kulo svirlo, Ola Shekri Yisrael Midbar, Olas Tamid Havi. And Abosai, on the other hand, Beis Hillel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, they all hold that the Ola that was offered up was a carbon tamid. So watch this. Abosai, now let's go through all these shitas. So Beis Shammai had Amar. So Beis Shammai already said, Rabbi Shmuel, Abosai, where do we see that Rabbi Shmuel holds that the Ola that was offered up at Har Sinai was an Ola Suriyah? Here we go. So the Gemara says, this Sanya, Rabbi Shmuel says, Klalos ne'emru b'Sinai. They both say, this is an incredible Gemara. I'll say, in general, this is something fascinating. Before you turn the page, we're going to look at Rashi, last Rashi in the Daf. So Rabbi Shmuel says like this, Klalos ne'emru b'Sinai, which means general halachas were said at Har Sinai. But say, look at Rashi before you turn the page. Harbe dvarim ne'emru stamim b'Sinai, shalon isparshu kol tzarchan. They both say, there were many halachas that were said at Har Sinai. They were kind of said in a general fashion. Shalom is parshu kol but were not fully explained. Upir shalo la'achar shukom ha'mishkan ba'amoid. Shalom is parshu sham halachos avodas kechol tzarach. So we'll say, now let's go back to the Gemara. So Klalos Nemro Sinai Amud Beis upratos v'ohel moed. So we'll say, this is really fascinating. In Rabbi Shmuel's Rabbi say, at Matan Torah, what were we given? At Matan Torah, we're given a general body of law. But that body of law was not really fully explained. Where was it explained? It was explained in the Ohel Moed. In other words, once the Mishkan, Rashi says, once the Mishkan was erected, HaKadosh Baruch Hu explained to Moshe the rest of the Torah there. So I will say, really fascinating. This is Rabbi Shmuel's model. Klalos, right? General principles given over at Har Sinai. Protos, specific halachos or explanation of the general rules was done in the Mishkan. I will say, by the way, and that wasn't a one-time event. Over the course of 40 years in the desert, HaKadosh Baruch Hu explains Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe subsequently the Kaz. Rabbi Akiva says no. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. He says, Klalos upratos nemru b'Sinai, v'nishnu b'oel moed, v'nishtalshu ba'arvos moav. Wow. Rabbi Akiva says no. Gans Torah, Klalos and Protos, general rules and specific details, everything was given at Har Sinai. Then it was reviewed in the Mishkan, and then it was reviewed a third time at Arvos Moav. So it's Arvos Moav, Sefer Dvarim, right by the Transjordanian lands. Incredible, Rabbosai. So therefore again, so I'll say, by the way, you hear this? This, by the way, is a fundamental machlokes in Jewish history. Fundamental machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel is saying only klalos were given, by the way, klalos with a chaf, not with a kuf. Right? General principles given at Har Sinai, specific details given over the course of 40 years in the Ohel Moed. Rabbi Akiva says, no, everything given at Har Sinai, klalos and pratos, everything given at Sinai, reviewed in the Ohel Moed, reviewed a third time at Arvos Moav, the Transjordanian lands, right before we enter into Eretz Yisrael. Now, I will say, watch this. They say now, watch. Rabbi Shmuel says, if you think that the Olah they offered up at Har Sinai was the Karban Tamid, mi'ika midi dimeikara lo by hefshef v'nituach ulebasov by hefshef v'nituach. We'll say, watch this. This is incredibly fascinating. You see, at Har Sinai, the Olah that they offered up did not have hefshit and nituach. Hefshit means skinning. Nituach means cutting up into pieces, dismembering. The Olah at Har Sinai did not have hefshit v'nituach. But yet the Karban Tamid must have hefshit v'nituach. So Rabbi Shmuel says, how can you possibly say that halacha l'maisa, the Karban Tamid that they offered up at Har Sinai was the Karban Tamid when this Olah did not require hefshet v'nituach? This is their raya. Seif Rabbos again, we're just building up the school of thought, and therefore again, it must have been what? It must have been an Olah Sriya. So also we're building up the school of thought, the camp of Beis Shammai. Rebbe Lazar, what does Rebbe Lazar say? Rebbe Lazar also discusses the same idea. This Sanya, Olas Tamid Hasuya B'Har Sinai. Literally, again, the Olas Tamid that was done at Har Sinai. Rabbi Lazar Omer Ma'aseh Ne'emru B'Sinai. Its details were said over at Har Sinai. V'hi atzma lo kerva. But this Karban Tamid itself was not offered up at Sinai. Why? Because the Olah offered up at Sinai was not an Olas Tamid, but rather was what? An Olas Riyah. Rabbi Akiva says, Karva v'shuv lo paska. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, says, no, it was offered, but Allah, and ultimately, again, once it was offered, it was never stopped being offered. Ve'elamani makayim hazvochim umincha higashtem li bamidbar arbaim shana. But what do you do with the pasuk that says, in Amos, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives most of the Klal Yisrael, he says, did you offer me up karbanos and a mincha in the desert, which sounds like Klal Yisrael didn't offer up karbanos in the desert. We'll say, this is incredible. So the Gemara says, Shvato Shalevi Shalo Avdu Avodah Zara Henikriva Osa. According to this approach, listen to this. After the Chet HaEgel, the Jewish people did not offer up the Karban Tamid, but rather the Karban Tamid was only offered up by Shevet Levi. Rabbi say, this is very unique. Why is it unique? Because the Tamid is supposed to be what? A Karban Sibor, everyone. So, apparently it's according to Rabbi Akiva in the aftermath of the Chet HaEgel, so the Klal did not offer it up. It was only offered it up by Shevet Levi. So we'll say, so that's the first school of thought. So the first school of thought is Beis Shammai and his followers, who hold that halacha l'maisa, the Olah offered up by Har Sinai was not the carbon tamid, but instead was the olas re'iyah. Now the second school of thought, Beis Hillel. So now we have Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel holds that he holds that the olah that was offered up at Har Sinai was the carbon tamid. So I already spoke about the sheet of Beis Hillel. So the Gemara says Rabbi Akiva, Nami da'amra. So what's Rabbi Akiva we just quoted before? Also holds that way. Rabbi Yosef Glili, what did Rabbi Yosef Glili say? This sign, Rabbi Yosef Glili, Omer, Rabbi Yosef says beautiful. Shalosh mitzvos nistav Yisrael ba'alosim l'regel. So I will say there are three mitzvos that a Jew has when he's ola regel. Three mitzvos. We'll say, what are the three mitzvos? Re'iyah, Chagigah, and Simcha. I will say, what this actually means is there are three karbanos you bring when you're a ola regel. So I will say, so just interesting, so just keep in mind all of the mitzvahs, because a lot of times we use the same names for different things, right? So there's the mitzvah of Simcha, the mitzvah of, right, or I should say there's the mitzvah of Aliyah Regel. The mitzvah of Aliyah Regel demands that you go where? Where? To Yerushalayim. Then there's the mitzvah of Re'iyah, what we call Re'iyah. Re'iyah is the obligation as incumbent upon males to come up to the Harabayis. Now once you're on the Harabayis, you have an obligation to bring three karbanos. Now, it's really two karbanos, but become three. What are the three karbanos? So again, they are Re'iyah. Re'iyah means what? Olas Re'iyah. This is all you're obligated to bring. Simcha, which is a shlamim. And I will say, the last thing is, Re'iyah, Chagigah. Carbon Chagigah is a shlamim. And then the third carbon is Simcha. Now, I will say, we haven't spoken about that. Those are called Shamei Simcha. Why do you bring Shamei Simcha? Why do you bring Shamei Simcha? I will say, for one reason. Why? Meat. Which means, by the way, if you don't need meat, let's say you have meat from other places, we're going to see you don't have to bring Shamei Simcha. Shamei Simcha are there to ensure that you have enough meat for Yom Tiv. So therefore I will say there are three mitzvahs when you come up to the Beis HaMikdash. There are three karbanos you bring: Re'iyah, Olas Re'iyah, Chagigah, Shamei Chagigah, and Simcha, Shamei Simcha. Watch this. Yesh b're'iyah she'im b'shteihen. There's an element by the Olas Re'iyah that doesn't apply to the other two. V'yesh b'chagigah she'im b'shteihen. So too Chagigah has unique aspects, doesn't apply to the other two. Yesh b'simcha she'im b'shteihen. And Shamei Simcha also have elements that are unique to it that don't apply to the other two. How so? Here we go. Yesh b're'iyah she'im b'shteihen. So there's something that applies to the Olas Re'iyah that doesn't apply to the other two. How so? Shari'iyah ola kula legava ma'she'im b'shtein. So it's obviously the Olas Re'iyah is fundamentally different than the Chagigah and than the Shamei Simcha. Why? Obviously, because the Re'iyah is what? An Ola, fully consumed in the Mizbeach, and the other two are Shlamim. Yesh b'chagigah ma'she'en b'shtein. Chagigah is different than the other two. In how so? Shechagigah yeshna lifnei hadibor. Ooh, ma'she'en b'shtein. Very interesting. So the Chagigah is different. Why is the Chagigah different? Because there was a carbon Chagigah. There was Shamei Chagigah. Even before Matan Torah. Which I will say again is the same school of thought of Beis Hillel, that ultimately again the shlamim they offered up by Har Sinai before Matan Torah was Shamei Chagigah. So you see Shamei Chagigah were offered up even before Matan Torah, Mashe'en came b'shnei Rabosai. But there was no Olas Re'iyah and there was no Shamei Simcha before Matan Torah. Lastly, Yesh b'Simcha Mashe'en b'shneihen. There's an element that applies to the Shamei Simcha that doesn't apply to the other two. How so? Shah Simcha nohages ba'anashim u'benashim Mashe'en b'shteihen. But also listen to this. Shamei Simcha are applicable to everyone. Right? But say, who has shaychas to Simcha? Shamei Simcha? As long as you're obligated in what? V'samachta b'chagecha, which everyone is obligated in. V'samachta b'chagecha. So ultimately you have a shaychas to Shalmei Simcha. So even women will be connected to Shalmei Simcha, whereas they're not necessarily connected to Olas Re'iyah or Chagigah. So I will say, Rabbi Shmuel, my time. So I will say, therefore, good. Rabbi Shmuel, my time. So why does Rabbi Shmuel go ahead and choose to on Beis Shammai? Because if you think that ultimately, again, the Ola that they offered up by Har Sinai was the Olas Tamid, mi'ika midi dimei karlo by heshev v'nituach, l'basov by heshev v'nituach. So must remember again, we saw this before. The problem with saying that the Ola of Har Sinai was a carbon tamid is what? Carbon tamid, we know halacha l'maisa requires what? Hefshech v'nituach, skinning and dismembering. We know that the Ola at Har Sinai did not have hefshet v'nituach. So how can you call that a carbon tamid? V'har Rabbi Yossi Galili Oda Amra Ola Shekrivi Yisrael Midbar Olas Tamid Havi Meikar Lo Ba'Hev Shevini Tuach So Ba'Hev Shevini Tuach. So I will say, but Rabbi Yossi Galili. Rabbi Yossi Galili, he did, and I will say, actually, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say this is going to be the burning question. Ultimately, again, against saying that the Ola of Har Sinai was in fact the Tamid, because it did not have Shivini Tuach. How we resolve that, in Miras Hashem we'll see tomorrow. Also, remember again, we're still in the middle of what? We're just trying to figure out what has what value. Machlokes Neshama Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai ascribes greater value to the Ola, lesser value to the Shami Chagigah. Beis Hillel just the opposite, greater value to the Shami Chagigah, lesser value to the Ola Asriya. Halach l'maaseh Miras Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach.